It's time for our best decks tier list roundup for Pokemon Pocket Celestial Guardians expansion. Let's go ahead and break down my personal power ratings for those common decks you're going to play against on the ladder, as well as see top performing in tournaments right now. Headlining our C tier, we have the Celestial Guardians themselves, both Solgaleo variations and Lunala Tina, as well as Magnezone Oricorio, Lucario and Lycanroc Rampardos, Mewtwo Gardevoir, Psychic box variations, and then Decidueye decks. Solgaleo has three fairly varied builds and how they play out. Skarmory is easily the most popular when it comes to your secondary attacker, but Excalibur as well as Snorlax powered by Berry see plenty of play and have had top finishes as well. Personally, I'm partial to the Excalibur build because the 30 damage chip shot as well as 20 into the bench allows Solgaleo's 120 damage to line up more cleanly into more one-hit knockouts. When you combine this with a copy of Cyrus, it gives you more controlling over the pacing of the game. After that, I think the Snorlax Berry variation is likely the second best because its ability to deal 100 damage allows you to clean out things like Oricorio that are otherwise stonewalling your legendary Pokemon. Lunala EX is a card that allows you some especially tricky gameplay since you can pivot your Pokemon out of the active spot and immediately push its energies up onto something else, allow you to continue attacking without ever missing a beat so long as you're shuffling between Psychic Pokemon. Its ability also makes it so that in tandem with Giratina EX, you can allow Giratina to battery other things, moving the energy that it's generated up to your active. Deck lists like the sample here, featuring copies of Mewtwo EX as their heavy hitter are most common, as well as a baby Giratina, so you have something that can clear out opposing copies of Oricorio. We also occasionally see deck lists playing Rayquaza EX as well as a secondary hitter that can deal a big burst of damage even across your opponent's backline. Magnezone Oricorio is an archetype that has a pretty polarized matchup spread. It's obviously very powerful into opposing EX decks thanks to Oricorio, and Magnezone's big burst of damage on a 1-point body is quite good as well. That being said, it really struggles into the many decks in the metagame playing Rampardos, since that 130 damage burst kicks up to 150 on Magnezone due to its typing weakness. Speaking of Rampardos, there are two variations of this powerful fossil Pokemon in the C tier right now in my opinion. The first of them is Lucario Rampardos from our previous season that's still lurking around the edges, putting up all right and sporadic tournament results. The second is one that took the metagame by storm a little bit early on as a player used it to spike an early ladder result, but it failed to really gain traction inside of the tournament, featuring Lycanroc. The upside of the Lycanroc build is because you're guaranteed to lead on your Rockruff, and then that fishes up its stage 1, you're able to very consistently apply early pressure, so you can be getting in chip shots of solid damage while you build up the Rampardos in your backline. The Lucario build is a little bit less aggressive to start consistently, but it allows Rampardos to hit harder, clearing things out like opposing Giratinas in one shot for 150 damage. Rising from the ashes of unplayability thanks to some new tools, Mewtwo Gardevoir, while not the metagame dominating powerhouse that it was in our first season, is now a competitive off-meta deck if you really enjoy these characters. Rare Candy into Gardevoir gives this deck exceptionally strong draws when going first, allowing you to hit for 50 damage and then start side driving as early as your second attack. And Tapu Lele is a phenomenally powerful new tool for Psychic decks, giving you a potent attacker into things like Giratina and Darkrai that need 3 and 4 energy to be attacking. Speaking of Tapu Lele, this potent anti-meta card backed up by Psychic Oricorio that hits for a whopping 80 points of damage are headliners in two different Psychic toolbox decks that have been among my favorite things to play in this expansion. One of these features Banette as a potent stage 1 disruptive card as its headlining attacker, and the other one is leveraging Mimikyu alongside Acerola as a potent burst of damage. Banette's a card that's really impressed me, especially when your opponents are caught off guard by its ability. It makes you play the game in an incredibly different way. Its disruptive effect not only locks the opponent's opponent out of attaching energy to their active Pokemon, but it applies it as a global effect, meaning that evolutions don't get rid of it, and even if your opponent manages to retreat, they can't attach energy to whatever their next active is going to be, or if Bennett scores a knockout, whatever comes to the front of the line is not going to be able to get an energy on it the following turn. This is really powerful when a lot of people are cutting on things like X-Speed and Leaf right now. You often lock in a Pokemon early and get a guaranteed point while you build something like a Mewtwo EX up behind it. Mimikyu is a card that, while it's not a lot to look at on its base stat line, when you combine it with Acerola, the effect is incredibly powerful. Acerola is effectively a supercharged Giovanni red healing split card that most notably doesn't depend on your attack to deal damage, meaning you can clear your opponent's active Pokemon with its effect and then hit whatever their follow-up is with Mimikyu for 60 points of damage. Both of these decks are incredibly satisfying to navigate as they're all one knockout point Pokemons. You have things like X-Speed to give you maximum maneuverability. If you love lots of decisions in your games of Pocket, I can't recommend these two enough. Finally, two different Decidueye EX decks round out our C tier today, one featuring Lurantis as its secondary attacker and the other one playing Greninja with two different colors of energy. The Greninja build here is definitely the higher power level of these two in terms of the raw strength it has when everything gets online. You get set up, and with Water Shuriken and Pierce the Pain, you deal 120 damage to something anywhere on your opponent's board every single turn. That being said, this requires two different Stage 2 Pokemon, so it's not terribly consistent. Lurantis only needs a Stage 1, and it hits for 20 across everything every single turn. It also has the type advantage against things like Darkrai, and because both your Pokemon are grass, it allows you to leverage Leaf Cape and Erica as your healing to give you more options for your sustain. I don't think there's a clear-cut winner in terms of which of these two decks is better. You just got to ask yourself the question, do you want to have something more consistent with Lurantis or more powerful when you high roll with Greninja? Our B tier decks are ones that you consistently see making deep runs in our community tournaments, but they also don't have particularly high play rates, so if they don't show up in a particular round of results, it's not too surprising either. The B tier right now for Pokemon Pocket, in my opinion, is Meowscarada variations, Greninja Oricorio, Turtonator Stage 2 Fire Pokemon, as well as Charizard Incineroar. Meowscarada variations remain a top anti-meta pick in Pokemon Pocket like they were last season. Being able to crack for whopping 130 points of damage into any EX for just 2 energy hits hard and fast, especially when paired with Rare Candy in our latest expansion. This archetype also picked up Leaf Cape as a way to gain additional sustain, and Decidueye as its most common partner, allowing it to chase down things in the back where you previously would have needed a Cyrus to fish them back up. Even against the non-EX decks in the format, Rampardos is probably the most popular, and that card really struggles against these higher HP Pokemon that are single knockout points, and in particular, Meowscarada is a grass type, so while you're not hitting Rampardos for 130, you're still cracking it for 80 for 2, which is pretty incredibly efficient. In addition to the Decidueye variations that are quite popular right now, we see Beedrill EX as a partner from last season, as well as the occasional Zarina for builds that want to lean in on all one knockout point only Pokemon in this shell. Oricorio Greninja is a new archetype that's looking to occupy a similar vein to the Meowscarada decks of beating up on the EX heavy decks at the top of the metagame. Rather than hitting hard and fast though, the yellow chicken is simply invulnerable to attack damage from EXs. Two notable pieces of tech in the optimized builds of these deck lists is the inclusion of both Guzma as well as Healing Shaman. This is because decks like Darkrai Giratina are playing things like Rocky Helmet as well as Darkrai Chipshot damage to allow them to eventually kill Oricorio even without attacks, so having the ability to knock their hats off or heal half of the Darkrai Chipshot damage every single turn gives your yellow bird enough of a lifespan to be able to take them down 50 points of damage at a time. All of that being said, this archetype does struggle a bit against decks that aren't leaning just on EX Pokemon in the metagame, such as things like Meowscarada. Turtonator Stage 2 is an archetype that comes in 3 distinct flavors, with each of the headlining Stage 2 Fire EXs we have in the game right now. There is Stoke Charizard, that's probably the most popular, followed by Incineroar, with Infernape EX bringing up the rear of the class. The basic idea of any of these deck lists is relatively straightforward. The Fire EXs are powerful enough to carry a game completely on their own when they come together. That being said, you have a little bit of inconsistency because they're a Stage 2, and because they're EX Pokemon, they have a hard time getting through opposing copies of Oricorio, or Meowscarada can run them down in Enter Turtonator, which when paired with its supporter card Kawaii, starts attacking for 90 points of damage on the second turn of the game. This gives you some free wins in even the non-Oricorio matchups of just hitting hard and fast, but it also gives you a 2-card combo that's a clean one-shot answer to things like Oricorio, and that burns down Meowscaradas in 2 hits, even through a lot of sustain and things like Erica in the mix. Charizard Incineroar gives up the safety net of being able to clear Oricorios in order to have 2 different EX Pokemon that it can assemble to hit hard and fast with. This archetype is one of the few in the metagame that goes directly toe-to-toe with Darkrai Giratina, one of the top dogs right now, because of Stoke Charizard's ability to start cracking for 150 every single turn quite quickly, which takes out basic EX Pokemons very cleanly. In my opinion, there are 3 decks in Pokemon Pocket right now that I would classify as A tier. They are Greninja Tapu Lele, Carnivine Crobat, and Garchomp Rampardos. Greninja Tapu Lele is kind of the anti-Giratina deck in our metagame. Tapu Lele is just incredibly potent against cards that are charging up to big amounts of energy with its incredibly efficient attack, hitting for upwards of 80 points of damage per shot, while only giving up 1 knockout point if they eventually clear out your incredibly efficient attacker. This deck list is also playing Psychic Energy to attack with Tapu Lele, obviously, and this gives you an advantage with your Giratinas as well into opposing decks that aren't running Psychic Energy, letting you start hitting a little bit sooner. Greninja kind of ties the whole room together, allowing your copies of Cyrus to be extra deadly, as well as offering additional chip shot points of damage for your Giratina to get up to 150 in a single turn without having to rely on Dark Energy from something like Darkrai. These deck lists also tend to play dual energy, so Greninja can serve the important role of being able to clear opposing copies of Oricorio for 80 damage in a single turn. Carnivine Crobat is the premier aggressive deck in our metagame. Carnivine cracks for 50 points of damage consistently early as long as you have Arceus on the bench, and when all of the stars align and you have Zubat, Crobat, Rare Candy in the mix as well, you can start hitting for 80 points of damage on the second turn of the game. If you're someone that likes to have a relatively even matchup spread, this is likely the deck for you in our current metagame. While it doesn't have any incredibly favorable matchups, it doesn't have any disfavorable ones either, likely due to the fact that your aggressive starts give you a fighting chance absolutely everywhere. Garchomp Rampardos is a double Stage 2 deck that gets to take a good advantage of our new supporter Lele, allowing you to heal either of your payoffs for a whopping 60 points of damage once you get set up, so they can keep attacking really efficiently with their low energy hits. This deck list matchup table is kind of the inverse of the Carnivine Crobat deck, which is to say, aside from it having a relatively even matchup against the Carnivine deck, it's either incredibly favored against things like Giratina, Greninja, Tapu Lele, or it's incredibly disfavored against things like Darkrai Giratina. If you're someone that wants to have really easy matchups, both for your opponents and for you, this deck list seems to be an excellent choice because someone's getting run off the board a majority of the time, it looks like. Last but certainly not least, that leaves us with our lone S tier deck in our current metagame as Darkrai Giratina once again. While it is certainly the case that Rare Candy has created a number of Stage 2 decks that are fast and competitive when they come together, Darkrai Giratina still remains the top dog because while it doesn't have as impressive burst damage as something like a Stoke Charizard or a Solgaleo, this deck list leaning only on potent basic Pokemon is far more consistent than any of these decks looking to assemble 3-card combos could ever dream of being. Giratina still hits really hard, and Darkrai backs it up to let it chip shot all the way up to even 170 points of damage in a single turn in tandem with things like Red and Rocky Helmet. If you are someone that's looking for the absolute most consistent deck to make your climb as short as possible up to Masters this season, you should absolutely still be playing this deck. I think it is a significant cut above the rest of the field, even if there are a handful of things like Oricorio and Meowscarada explicitly gunning to take it down. Appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video. If you found my breakdown and sample deck list useful for you at home, either to find something to play or know what you're playing into, be sure to smash the like button on this video to hopefully help it reach some more people. If you're someone that happens to be new here and you enjoy deck list roundups like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I do a weekly meta report covering what's going on in Pokemon Pocket's largest tournaments at the start of every week. I do new deck roundups of things that are spiking individual results that might be worth looking at, and as always, when we have new cards around the corner, likely at the end of the month, we'll be giving you the breakdown on where they could fit into our existing and possibly new decks as well. Thanks for making it all the way through to the end, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.